breaking special report by Bisnow, real estate is responsible for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But almost half of the world's largest real estate investors, which own or control more than $1.2 trillion of property, have no plans to reduce carbon emissions from their portfolios, which is according to real estate's 75 largest institutional investors, listed companies, and investment managers. The United Nations has said that it is vital that the sector responsible for such a large proportion of emissions reduces its carbon output to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or less by 2050 and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Climate experts believe that the real estate sector needs strong decarbonization targets and that the biggest owners and managers in the sector are instrumental in leading that process. A report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change last month showed that the worst effects of climate change can be avoided, but only if action is taken right now. The report specifically cited real estate as a major contributor to emissions, as one of the sectors where urgent action is most needed. The study also revealed that 9 out of 10 senior leaders in the UK real estate industry don't believe that the industry will hit its 2050 net zero targets. Even among investors that have decarbonization targets, the vast majority don't measure or plan to reduce their emissions from the construction of buildings where there is so much embodied carbon. And they don't track or have a plan to reduce emissions from their tenants. Additionally, fewer than half of the organizations reviewed confirmed that their decarbonization plan doesn't involve the use of carbon offsets, or that they would only use the offsets when the vast majority of emissions had been reduced. The investigation also revealed that only a handful of the companies that have target for reducing emissions are planning to hit net zero faster than they're legally obligated to do so, raising questions about how fast companies are decarbonizing and whether regulators are doing enough to ensure that businesses meet their obligation to help combat the climate crisis. Sustainability leaders describe carbon offsets to Bisnow as a band-aid solution as society waits for green energy to reach a point where it can replace the fossil fuels that currently power a huge proportion of buildings globally. The real estate sector's global emissions are getting worse, not better, according to the UN. After dropping in 2020 as a result of the pandemic as an anomaly, emissions from buildings and construction reached an all-time high in 2021, 2% higher than in 2019. While buildings were becoming more energy efficient, the growth in the overall size of the sector was more damaging than the improvements their owners made. There are complexities and real challenges to real estate's push to decarbonize. Real estate companies will need to focus on reducing emissions from construction and tenants, in addition to their own portfolios, and accelerate the decarbonization process to reach net zero faster than they're legally obligated to do. The industry needs to reduce emissions by 90% by 2050, and this requires a pretty radical change. One thing to note, funding sources, like we've already talked about this, are already starting to put a lot of pressure on investors and sponsors to kind of make a switch to net zero planning. Based on this report, it's easy to see how, one, you can be a part of the solution because a lot of people aren't even trying yet, and two, you can get in early and have an early mover advantage. So don't wait. Here's your opportunity to jump in and really make a difference in the industry. If you found this update helpful, please subscribe below to be notified when new updates come through. If you'd like to have a summary weekly of the top news in the space, subscribe to the newsletter at thelimitedpartner.com/news. We'll see you next time.